Today, we have some spectacular speakers in here to talk about building this space. And mostly I want to get off the stage and get out of the way so that you can enjoy them and what they have to share. Where better to start a session on media and internet than with a profile of a true internet pioneer. George Conrades is the chairman of Akamai and a board member of Oracle, Harley-Davidson, and Ironwood Pharmaceuticals. George is joined by the managing partner at Canaan Partners Israel, Izhar Shay, who focuses on investments in Israel in the cloud, mobile, and digital media sectors. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome.
No, you go. Izhar.
Welcome, George.
Geez, I'm going to go to sleep here.
Thank you for this warm introduction. I'm truly honored, privileged to host on stage, as defined in the booklet of this conference, one of the internet true pioneers and leaders, George Conrades, chairman of Akamai, board member at Oracle, Harley-Davidson. We are discussing in this session the internet times, and the internet is what fuels the world in many ways. Right? There we go. Thank you. For those of you who missed the first 2 minutes, George Conrades.
I'll say it all again. It was very nice.
Chairman of Akamai, and I'm truly privileged and honored. And George, the internet fuels the world in many ways, economy, social-wise, and in many other directions. Akamai is one of those companies that actually makes the internet what it is today, that enables most of what we do today on social networks, on internet transactions, e-commerce, anything that is out there. And actually, Akamai started with a set of very bright mathematical algorithms. And because we are speaking to an audience of entrepreneurs, early stage founders and investors, I wonder if you could give us a snapshot of how this started. How do you take a bright couple of founders with some unbelievable talent in mathematics and algorithms and create such an unbelievable, sustainable business?
Well, the story of Akamai really begins at MIT with a professor and a graduate student who were in the laboratory for computer science, and in particular the algorithms group that the professor headed, and a young man who with deep roots in Israel, Danny Lewin, his graduate student. And they were challenged by Tim Berners-Lee, who was the creator of the World Wide Web, to solve the problem that was looming of the worldwide wait. And so this was, 20 years ago. And already the internet was failing in its ability to deal with heavy bit streams, let alone what's going on today. So they worked, Berners-Lee took this problem to the algorithms group, and Danny came up with a technology that exists today. It's at the heart of what we do, called consistent hashing. And I won't go into that because I can't. But it is the basis of how we distribute content around the world. And so the idea was to do that as a laboratory project, and then they got involved with the MIT 50K contest. And while they didn't win it, it was enough incentive to cause them to think about creating a company. And that was the beginnings of Akamai. So they went to various venture firms. Battery Ventures invested first, and Polaris, where I was at the time, venture partners in Boston, we joined Battery in that Series A round, and I represented Polaris on the board of Akamai and fell in love with Danny, the graduate student, and Tom Layton, the professor, head of the algorithms group, and went on the board and then was asked to be the first CEO of
So
the
you
business.
actually turned from an investor to CEO and then chairman of Akamai, where you have been for the last 17 years.
Yes, I was always the chairman. The first 6 years was the CEO. But I had spent 31 years at IBM in the development since 1961 of the computer industry, and so knew something about the hockey stick when a new technology gets started, because in 1961, IBM was shipping its first transistorized business computer. That's what we were selling and installing, and then had become the CEO of Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, the company that actually had helped build the original ARPANET. And so I, for 5 years, learned a lot about the internet. And so I was prepared to listen to the professor and the graduate student when they came in to seek a round of funding, and understand that this was a revolutionary idea. The idea that, unlike the thousands of networks that make up the internet today, they would distribute within those thousands of networks and create a distributed computing model, which is really an overlay on the internet, and that's how they would finesse the World Wide Web. And I listened to that and I thought, these guys are geniuses, and then the question became, well, can they do it? Will it work?
And it did, and it has been working for 17 years now. I wonder how you reflect on this business now, as having seen it growing for the last 17 years. What does it take for an idea, for a concept, to become such a sustainable business, such a great company, which, by the way, has provided significant returns to its investors times and times again, including the public investors in the public market? What does it take for a company? What does it take for the team to build such a great operation?
Well, I like to think that, and we have a partner here. We're in a venture fund for startups, and think that there are 4 things you need to think about. One is the big idea: is it transformative? And certainly the idea that you could make the internet faster, more reliable, and more secure is a huge idea, because the internet is not that. The second is, does the technology work? You can have the best idea in the world, but if the technology can't sustain and scale, then you don't have a great idea. It doesn't manifest itself in value. And of course, then there's the business model. Can you print money? And obviously, the most important element is the people. And I think the thing that has been differential about Akamai, I could say a lot of things about our culture and about our spirit. We can do that in a minute, maybe. But is that the idea is so big that it's not a point product. In fact, it's a service, and that's another element of it. But that it's dealing with a problem that not only exists, but is even more challenging every day. The internet is like a roiling ocean. And if you've ever watched the ocean, you know, on vacation or something, you realize it's never the same, never the same. It's always moving, things are happening. That's the internet. And Akamai, with our network, the overlay, the distributed network, ultimately we want to be in your smartphone. That's where, you know, 200,000 servers today and 1 million other devices that we interact with. Well, there are many millions that we could be involved in. That's a big idea, and that enables the technology to work. So I think that's one of the fundamentals about that the work is never done. We have lifetime employment, and it's a service, which means you can adapt quickly to changes. And so I think fundamentally, deep down, in addition to our culture, yeah, we do print money, that's important. And we have fantastic people. We're up to 6,000 now. But I think it's the idea, it's the transformation.
So it takes a great idea to build a great company, and obviously it takes talented, brilliant people, but it also, as you mentioned, takes culture. Now, I visited you in your headquarters.
Yeah.
In your office, you were wearing sneakers and a t-shirt, and I wonder if this is part of the culture of moving fast, of being part of the group, of everybody communicating directly with everybody. Well, what's the culture that has enabled all of this?
I don't think it has anything to do with how you dress. None at all. Maybe it's just because I was too lazy to get dressed up. My wife hates it, by the way. She says, that's not what I remember you as, and you're not a teenager anymore. So I go, all right. But the culture was set by Danny Lewin. We have deep roots in Israel. Danny, let me just start and go back. Danny was raised early in Colorado. His family then took him, Zionist, to Israel, and he did his high school there, and then Sariyat Matkal.
Sayeret Matkal, yes, you're doing fine.
It's hard to pronounce, and Technicon for 4 years, and then MIT. Now this young man is like today's superheroes. You rarely meet people like this, people who are part Israeli commando of the most elite form and an MIT genius. And when that is there as a combination, almost all things are possible. And he was 24/7, he was also young, but 24/7, and with this desire now to build a great company, to take this idea where he had done the initial work to make it feasible that you could distribute technology around the world and have it all operate correctly, and make that a reality. And I was fortunate enough to join them to help put a business around these.
So, George, 17 years later, which is a long time, is that culture still there? Do you still maintain the startup mentality of having to do fast?
It's so hard. You know, if you have 25, 50 people around a card table, so to speak, you know what the culture is. You see the culture. You are the culture. You can talk to the culture. And you can influence the culture by the way you act, you know. And today, we worry a lot about it. In the last couple of years, we've probably added 3,000 people. Now, what do they know about what happened 17 years ago? And how this all, so we work very hard on it, most of it in management training, management development, but we talk about things, some basic principles. One of them is to lead by example, and this is an important part of management, of leadership, which is to lead by example. You have to practice productive behaviors each and every day as a leader. Integrity, honesty, accountability, teamwork, prize diversity, prize curiosity. And another is to, as a leader, to suffer together. That's straight from Sariyat Matkal. Trust me, suffer together. The leader, if you have to work 24/7, the leader's in the middle of it 24/7. If you have to cut expenses, cut costs, cut your salary. We did that when we had our ups and downs. So that's another tenet of what we are. And the other is to hold people accountable and get rid of non-performers as fast as you can in a decent way, in a way where you treat people fairly. But and the non-performance point is the team has to be the best it possibly can be, and non-performers drag the performance down. So we have a culture that's built about that. But the other part of the culture, which marveled me coming from IBM after 31 years, was the argumentative culture that I think came from MIT. Well, it also came from Danny. But the idea that you as a leader, you should embrace conflict. You should manage conflict to get the very best ideas. You should bring everybody in on that. And you should be able to argue your assumptions. That's very academic, but it's also critical to keeping the pace and to coming up with new ideas and to keeping all the participants involved.
And the culture is still there. George, on 9/11, about 15 and a half years ago, Daniel Lewin boarded American Airlines flight number 11 from Logan Airport on his way to the West Coast. Where were you that day, and where did the news reach you?
Well, I was on the West Coast. Unfortunately, Danny stayed behind to work till the middle of the night on a problem. By the way, that book that you have here tells this whole story. This is a terrific book. If you want to read about the beginnings of Akamai and the early life of Danny, it's in no better time. It's an outstanding book. Anybody who's entrepreneurial should be involved in. But in any event, I got that news out. I couldn't believe it. I had been swimming, and I came through the gym of the I forget where we were. We were here. I was here in San Francisco. Forget where it was. Anyway, there you saw the plane, going into the tower, and I had no clue that that was Danny's plane. And then I started to get the messages before, And anyway, that was really the only advantage that you get out of something like that. It gives you the opportunity to remember someone in so many ways. We have awards in Danny's name. We have sets of principles in Danny's name. One of the ones that he and I came up with was never dismiss an idea from any source without due consideration. Now that's saying something to an Israeli commando. You mean you want to argue with me? He wanted it. He loved it. Yeah. And so we try to practice as much of his spirit as we can.
Is it right to say that his spirit is still there with Akamai, with you, his cultural guidelines, the way he wanted to put his company together? Is it all still there?
It certainly is with the leaders of the business today. We have many people who have been with us for 10 and 15 years who have been indoctrinated this way. And as I say, I think one of the biggest challenges now is when you get to, we're at 6,000. By the way, we have 140 in Israel going to 170 this year. How do you inculcate this spirit, this culture, this way of operating, this respect for one another, the embracing of conflict, the engendering of trust? You argue, and be vulnerable. We work hard on this in the management training, but it's a challenge.
I want to go back to Daniel Lewin and his attitude and spirit, because I think this will speak to a lot of us here in the audience who are trying to build great companies. This book that George mentioned is called No Better Time. And No Better Time is actually a cultural attitude. This is something that defines, I think, Akamai and definitely defined Daniel Lewin. What does the book mean, or what did he mean when he said no better time? Or as you told me, he would like to say, or he's saying was, you were behind, right?
Oh, yeah.
What did he mean by that?
Well, that was one of his favorite sayings. I used to sit in the back of the room when he was talking to the engineers, and somebody would be talking about a project, and he almost always say, you're behind, because there's just this tremendous amount of work to yet be done, things to invent, things to implement, things to execute. And you're behind, but it's an attitude. There's no better time than now to do something. Live in the present, take the now. You just don't sit on your butt.
We'll take that as a good takeaway from this session. George, I guess that and the other perspectives helped you shape your opinion about the Israeli high-tech and the ties between the Israeli high-tech and the US markets, as we are here in a conference that bridges the big ocean between Israel and the US. Could you give us one or two takeaways as to your tips to entrepreneurs and investors here in the audience who want to build international companies based on Israeli, US entrepreneurs? Any tip or guidance that you may give us would be appreciated, coming from where you come.
Well, I think the relationship between Israel and, let's just say, US-based companies is critical. Akamai finds that. We've bought a company, Cotendo, in 2011, and we've invested in 2 companies, and then 3 more with Microsoft in an accelerator environment, on the idea that this is where there are innovations that can help. But we personally invested in Canaan, Israel, and we have a portfolio company we work on together. That's why I like Izhar so much. He's very metrics driven, and I'm very close to the Israeli entrepreneur, and so close that it's hard for me to criticize him. not for him. Izhar's a tough manager. So in any event, I have personal experience with it, but I think that Israel, of course, doesn't have the market that the U.S. and the rest of the world provides, but the linkage between the two is critical because the U.S. and also the rest of the world, you can see that by the attendees, don't have the innovation, always have the innovation and the intellect and the energy of the Israeli entrepreneurs. And I think it's a fabulous combination. And as I say, Akamai is very involved with Israel, and we plan to continue to do more and to continue to grow our headcount in Israel.
Thank you, George, for those important takeaways. As we are almost running out of time, I did want to dedicate the last 30 seconds of our session to actually a dedication to you. So this book, actually, which I recommend to everybody here with the title No Better Time, is about the amazing story of Akamai and Daniel Lewin. But this is a special copy of the book where Professor Tom Lighton, one of the co-founders of Akamai, dedicated this copy to George. And this is what the bright professor from MIT thinks about George. Dear George, thanks for making the dream become a reality. There would have been no story to tell without you. Tom Lighton. And yeah.
Okay.
And to those of you who have their thoughts and perspectives about investors and VCs and so on, I do want to remind you, please remember George was an investor, a venture capitalist before joining the Akamai team and making a dream and a great story come true. George, it has been a great pleasure and honor to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
And please remember, all of you, no better time. There has not been, and there is no better time to start your companies. Good luck.